Good afternoon and welcome to a new day in Galicia Innovation Days. I hope you have taken advantage of the B2B meetings during this morning. Right now we have 3 ongoing events, specifically 3 workshops. In our case, we're going to focus on the ROADMAP European project for those regional stakeholders. This afternoon, apart from our questions and answer sections in our platform, we are also using the Klaxoon application, which is a meeting software in which you can also participate and interact live with us. At the end of this session, which will last about 3 hours, we will have a stakeholders forum in which we want all the stakeholders and you to participate. So please click on the link you have on the chat or use the QR we are putting in the screen to make questions. With that QR, you will go into the Klaxoon application and we can attend your questions and interact with you. The aim of this project we are going to talk about, which is ROADMAP, is to foster transitions towards prudent antimicrobial use in animal production in a large variety of contexts. To welcome you and to talk about ROADMAP, we are today with Nicolás Fortané from National Research Institute for Agriculture, Food and Environment of France, who is the project coordinator. Mr. Fortané, all yours whenever you want. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and very pleased to be here. I will start with sharing my screen. Just a second. Why don't I see what I want? That is here. And another second. That should be all right, I guess.
Yes.
Perfect. So hello again. So as I was introduced, yes, I'm a researcher in sociology in France, and I'm the coordinator of this European project, which is funded by the European Commission, and we have one of the Spanish partner here is FEUGA. So this project is, as you know, of course, is dedicated to a very important topic, which is antimicrobial resistance, and especially to focus on the use of antimicrobials in livestock farming, even if, of course, as you know, this issue is a more complex and wiki problem than only what is happening in agriculture. But this is the aim and the objective of the project to focus on this side of the issue. So I'm gonna give you an overview of what we do and how we conceive what is important to tackle and to deal with regarding that particular issue, and in particular through I'm gonna give you more detail on that soon-ish, but through a project which is not only technical or biologically driven, but also interdisciplinary, that takes care of social sciences and economics, and also multi-actor. So next slide. Yes. So basically, as I was saying, this project has been funded 2 years ago as a Horizon 2020 project on a specific subtopic on antimicrobials and animal production. It will last until May 2023. So basically, we have a bit less than 2 years left, and it's a relatively large country because we have 17 partners, and research activities and development activities are currently undertaken in 10 countries, which includes, of course, 8 countries from Europe, North, West, and South mainly, but also 2 low and middle income countries in Asia and in Africa. And INRAE, so the French National Research Institute for Food, Agriculture, and the Environment, is coordinating the whole project. So to explain you a little bit further how this project has been conceived and what we consider is very important to have in mind when we try to tackle this, the project is organized in 4 main pillars, let's say even 3 main pillars plus a 4th one, which is more dedicated to communication and stakeholder engagement. But basically the overall objective, of course, which is in line with EU AMR policy, and I'm sure all the national action plans in Europe, but basically which is fostering or encouraging prudent use of antimicrobial in livestock farming. So first of all, the main goal as we consider is to understand the drivers of antimicrobials in a variety of contexts, because as we know, and as I'm sure you're aware of, there is a long history beyond the massive use that we had in agriculture of antibiotics. Of course, we are already in almost all European countries, but things are a little bit variable depending on the countries and context. But we are already in a trend of reduction since the last 5 to 10 years. But of course, this trend must keep on going. But historically, yes, there have been a massive use. And there is still a massive use in other regions of the world. And it's very important to understand why and how it did happen if you really want to focus on the drivers and on the factors that contributes to the use of antimicrobials, especially because we consider that these drivers and factors are twofold. Of course, there are behavioral, basically, aspects, the behaviors of the stakeholders, either they are industrials, farmers, vets, and so on, which includes their attitudes, their perceptions, their practices, and all of that regarding the use of antimicrobial, their conception of animal health, and so on. It is very important to understand how those things are being structured so that, people do rely on antibiotic use. But there are also structural or systemic drivers, which could be the influence of the regulatory system, which could also be the structure of the food chain, for example, the structure of the drug market, and we do have a lot of systemic drivers that needs also to be dealt with if we want to find optimal and efficient solution to foster prudent use of antimicrobial, and that can't only rely on, for example, raising awareness or changing behaviors of the end users. It must be at a more holistic approach or level that we try to have impact if we really want to have long-term and long-lasting effects regarding our measures and so on. So that is basically the work of the pillar one, and maybe I can give you a couple of examples in a few minutes. The second pillar is the one which is actually the one we are really focused at the moment, but it is the one which is really based on multi-actor and participatory approaches, where basically we try to co-develop strategies to encourage prudent use of antimicrobials. So basically we have technical tools and behavioral tools to foster change. We try to focus on socioeconomic and policy instruments, but more importantly, and after me, Tamara will present that a little bit further, but we rely on a tool, on an approach that we call the living labs here, which is basically a series of meetings and interactions between a variety of actors and stakeholders, which includes, of course, animal health professionals such as farmers, vets, or technicians, but also industrials, policymakers, and of course, at the end of the day, the researchers that we are, so that basically we try to empower those people so that they can take in charge or take responsibility for the trends in terms of antimicrobial reduction that they want to reach or to obtain, and also so that basically the solutions can be contextualized, could be tailored according to local context. And we believe this is very important, because we believe that there is no one-size-fits-all kind of solution to fight AMR or to reduce antimicrobials, and each situation could be a little bit different according to the farming systems, according to the regulatory systems, or things like that. And last but not least, of course, we have our third and fourth pillar, which are more focused on assessment of our strategies and initiatives and impact. So basically evaluation of the strategies, trying after that will be basically toward the end of the project, trying to elaborate transition pathways or transition scenarios towards prudent use of antimicrobials, and of course communicate and engage with stakeholders to do all of this. And yes, I mean, basically I've already said that, but what is I think important in this project, it's that it's and probably because it's also I mean, social sciences and economics are important disciplines and approaches of the projects. But yes, we think in terms of systems. So basically, it's not just individual or behavioral change, as I said, but also structural one. And we think about in terms of transitions rather than just innovation. And because it's not just about new technologies, but also about changing again a whole approach of animal health that matters here. Yes, basically, I think this slide, I mean, you don't really need it in details, but this is how everything I said is more or less organized. So we have all these pillars, but what is important here, I would say, that you could see on the right side of the picture, is that we rely on case studies, basically. So all these 10 countries that I've mentioned, and that you will see in the next slide, where we are implementing activities, are really like the ground, the basis of the project, because that's very important for us to understand data from a very local level, to understand how things work, but also how things could be changed. And so basically we have this 10. I mean, here I just mentioned 3, but these case studies that are feeding basically all the tasks and activities of the project, to basically try to compare. And what are we comparing? Basically, we are comparing, as I said, we have 10 countries that you could see here on the left side of the chart. And of course, we are investigating various sectors, in particular dairy, pig, and poultry, and in some cases as well, the beef industry. And also we are investigating 3 different types. I mean, what we have conceived, as 3 different types of systems, of food systems. So intensive one, which are more industrialized, where basically the notion of productivity are set in a certain way, and of course all the farming systems and characteristics are of a certain kind. We have more alternative system, which includes, of course, organic farming, but not just that, also a farming system that apply to quality label schemes and stuff like that. For example, antibiotic-free schemes and labels. So basically, food systems and farming systems that are set in a way which is a bit different than what we call the intensive one. And of course, and in the end, we also have a few cases on more marginal systems, which includes, of course, the countries which are in the southern countries, like in Asia or in Africa, but also some sectors like the Turkey sector in the Netherlands and things like that, which are also specific, because they are not the main basically activity of the farms that we are investigating, and basically the way antimicrobials are used there is quite specific to the situation of this activity for the farmer or for the vets there. So this is what we have called the marginal systems, but we do think, and our preliminary results tend to confirm that things are operating in a way slightly different than in what we've called intensive systems and alternative ones. And basically what we hope that the main objective is to develop basically at least 3 transition scenarios and an impact pathway, which would be specific to these various systems. So what is interesting here is that we also want to try to develop a critical reflection about also this porosity, entanglement, and interactions between these various agri-food systems. As I said, there is no one-size-fits-all solutions, but there are also, not transitions, but interactions between the systems at church. In some cases, you even have some farmers or some vets who are operating in both intensive and alternative systems. And this is very interesting to see how the same actors can use antibiotics differently according to the objective that they have assigned to themselves, to their clients. So there are interaction, there are communication between basically our three types of system that we are investigating. And of course, the idea is that one can learn from each other, basically. Yes, so here I wanted to give I'm gonna go a bit quicker so that I'm not late, but yeah, to give you a bit more details or more depth into the content of each activity or task of the project. But if we look at basically at the first pillar, as I said, which is really focused on social sciences and economics, we have various tasks which are basically trying to understand, first of all, the structural drivers of antimicrobial use by assessing usage in each case study, thanks to local monitoring systems. It's something that has been done. Analyzing the impact of the regulatory system and the public regulations, both at the national level, but also the European one, because as you probably know, the European legislation on veterinary drugs, which includes, of course, antibiotics, is gonna change very, very soon. Basically, the new regulation is meant to be implemented from next January. With a lot of change. So basically, we also wanted to assess how each national system could basically be impacted, or could yeah, and what kind of effect the new legislation could have on the regulatory systems, because of course they are an important structural driver of potential change. We did also try to study the role of private standards and guidelines, such as I said, antibiotic-free label or stewardship programs, because and of course it is different in the various countries, but what we have seen is that for this specific issue, that is antimicrobial resistance, there is a growing number of private standards, things that are, bills of specifications and labels and so on, that are driven and implemented directly by the private actors, by the industries, the food industries, the cooperatives, sometimes also the slaughterhouses, or how do you call that, the retail industry, and which is driving change. And of course, we know it is controversial. It has been debated, and sometimes it even has been conflictual in some countries, that such private standards are being developed currently in various countries. But this is a thing for AMR, that this way of regulating, basically, of One Health issue is quite interesting to see. And of course we have tasks, which this one is still on the way, but of course mapping the stakeholders, like trying to do like cartography of stakeholders' behaviors, powers, and strategies, because it's quite fascinating to see how the structure of the game, so to say, has an impact on the way, in the end, antibiotics are prescribed or used by vets and by farmers. Still in the first pillar, like based on social sciences and economics, we do have more qualitative approach as well, about practices, knowledge, and motivations of animal health professionals. Since this part is really on the way, I would not be able to share the results with you today, but yes, it's based on different types of approach, both quantitative and qualitative, in social science and sociology in particular. And what you try to do basically is to really understand and to compare, of course, the working conditions and the business models of the farms and veterinary practices, the role of antibiotics in the farming and veterinary practices, and the conception of animal health, that is here. In particular, like a shift that we have started to witness, to observe, from more clinical and fire brigade types of interventions in the farms towards more preventive approach. And of course, it is known, and many of the stakeholders, including the veterinary organizations, or even at the policy level, are really pushing and encouraging for development of those preventive approach to animal health, where basically antibiotics would be less needed, basically, if we were to approach animal health and animal diseases and animal welfare as well from a more preventive perspective. But all of that, of course, needs a lot of change in the perception, in the knowledge, and also in the motivation in these actors, and even in terms of professional ethics and identity of what it is to be a good farmer, what it is to be a good vet, and all of that is being currently documented, I can say it like that, by our ongoing survey. Yes, and then, well, here I think I'm gonna try to be relatively quick, especially because we will focus on this with more details in a few minutes. But yes, then we have our step with the living labs, which are meant to empower all these actors I've mentioned, or the actors that you could see on the right side, and it is based off co-constructing strategies with all of them, and trying to have those iterative loops between what we do, what we think we have understood, what we think we have analyzed, and their own expertise, their own experience of what's going on the field. And that is very fascinating work to do, and very stimulating, even if, of course, it always depends on the context, and each of our living lab, they have set their own objectives, basically. So they're not working necessarily in the same way. They are not really working towards the same goal necessarily, or the same vision of what they should do. But actually, we do believe that there is no other way to empower and to engage with people to basically reach the overall objective of fostering prudent use of antimicrobials. Yes, this is it. And here, yes, like the last basically pillar, which has already started a little bit, but as you may understand, of course, which will be basically the last part of the project. And here I just wanted to share something which might sound a little bit theoretical still, and again, it's also because this part of the project hasn't started really yet. But as I told you before, we do really consider that thinking in terms of transition, like multi-level transition, is very important. And there are a lot of theories in social sciences, agricultural practices, and agricultural change, and so on, behind that, and that we basically use to conceptualize our project. And what basically I wanted to show you here is that how there is yeah, that's the whole thing. But basically, of course, there are several levels of change that matters. That there is a local context that I talked a lot. There is the more sectoral one, basically like the pig industry, the poultry industry, the dairy industry, and the more regulatory, or even we could call it social or social context. And it's very important to focus on all of that. And the way the project is conceived or is structured, basically try to take all of that into account. So we do have our case study that I mentioned before. So basically the first pillar, which is studying basically what is happening at the regulatory and the sectorial level, while our living lab basically are really focused on empowering people in the local context. And we do hope that in the end, all of this together could foster transition and impact, at least at the local and sectorial level, because of course then, I mean, it's not only up to researchers to basically provide change at a social or at a regulatory level, but of course we could I mean, we could help with our expertise or ideas, but I suppose that a workshop that like the one that we have today is also meant basically to exchange ideas and forms of expertise between what science can say and then what policy or even the industry can do with all of that. So but yes, basically this is really something that we try to have in mind and to focus on with the project. Yeah, let me check time. Yes, yes, of course, as you know, every project at this level has a lot of communication and dissemination tools. So feel free to get in touch with FEUGA, who is one of our partner who's dealing with all of that. But also you can check on our website and you will find all the links for all those tools on basically the social networks or the stakeholder community, where basically you would find resources and so on, and of course at some point more publications will and more outputs will be disseminated. Oh, sorry. Just maybe a couple of reminder to basically finish this presentation, but I would like to basically remind that we hope that I mean, at least we are trying to have an impact for a lot of basically actors, from farmers to vets, but also policymakers, and I should have written as well industries and also academia, of course, because once again we are here scientists, and yes, basically if I could sum up basically what we're trying to achieve it would be in three ways, like identifying critical points for change, suggesting several instruments and incentives that are adapted to a variety of contexts and industries, and of course to foster prudent use and help stakeholders to change their behavior and adapt according to this shared and global objective of reducing antimicrobial use. Yeah, just a couple of things that we have already achieved. I mean, there is no need necessarily to spend a lot of time here, and all our outputs, at least at the form of deliverables that are already submitted and validated, are accessible on our website. So feel free to check on this if you're interested in any of this first deliverable that we have finished. But of course, more will come in the coming months, in the next basically 18 months that we've left with the project. And just I wanted to highlight this one because which is more based on the governance, let's say, aspect or problematic of what we do, and we've tried here in one of our deliverables to create a model of how a good, shall I say, or an optimal AMR policy could work, and of course it should and could have impact, or basically optimize its impact. We have shown that there are different tools, different types of measures, from regulatory ones, voluntary ones, more information tools, and then economic instruments or incentives, like these 4 types. And basically this is what we saw in the various national action plans that we did study so far, and all these I mean, these 4 types or styles basically of intervention must be combined to maximize impact, and more broadly, of course, that requires to focus on 4 main basically things that are driven an optimal or good public policy. Of course, raising awareness, bringing evidence to what we do or why we or what we want to change, to focus also on practices. So basically on what actors do, what actors think, and that must be taken into account, and we need to build on what they do, so that basically people are involved, are engaged in the action plans. And of course the right governance should be as well implemented, so that basically everyone work together and cooperate with the same objective. Because I mean, let's not be naive here. I mean, there is also conflictual aspect in such a and competition, of course, between stakeholders in such a big issue like AMR. So it is important to focus on what bring people together, rather than what would put people in a situation of competition or even of conflict. Yes, just to let you know that we have ongoing events as well, if you are still interested in that. Especially for next month, you know that there is the World Awareness Antibiotic Week, and with 3 other European projects, Disarm, Avent, and Healthy Livestock, we are organizing a webinar on AMR and how to reduce antimicrobial use. So you will soon have news about that, and we would be delighted if you want to attend this event. More animation video that we will certainly start podcasting as soon as possible, and as I said, the surveys which are ongoing, and as soon as we have the results and we have analyzed the data, we will communicate on that, because we are really I mean, we hope that we will learn a lot regarding farmers and vets behaviors and perception thanks to our survey. So of course, don't forget to subscribe if you want to our email list and join our community. And again, thank you for your basically attendance here, and here you have our link if you want to know more about the project.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fortané. Now we are going to talk about the first results of the project, and from this moment we will continue in Spanish because it is a regional forum, but I remind you that we have the simultaneous translation for those who want to listen all the session in English. Como decía, ahora vamos a continuar en español, pero tienen...
As I was saying, we are going to keep on in Spanish, but you have simultaneous interpretation. We will talk about the results of the project. We have Tamara Rodríguez. She is the EU project manager and head of communication at FEUGA. You have the floor. Thank you, Aida. Gracias. I'm going to share my screen. So I hope you can see my screen. Yes, we can see it perfectly. First of all, Nicolás has summarized the whole roadmap project very well, which tries to have an impact at all levels, both in terms of veterinarians, livestock breeders, in the reduction or prevention of the abuse of antimicrobials in livestock breeding. What I would like to say here is I'm going to comment some of the things he said, specifically at a regional level. We are the stakeholder community that is working at a European level in this project, and we work together with country leaders, that is, the regional coordinators, and that is our role here in Spain, in order to carry out these events closer to our target audience, to tell them what we are doing, and in order to have a conversation where we can all co-create these models that Nicolás was talking about before. I'm going to show you a presentation which is a presentation by my colleagues Bernadetta Mete on the 5th International Congress on the Responsible Use of Antibiotics in Animals. So they spoke about the experience that we've had in the ROADMAP project. I'm going to tell you in more detail how these living labs are working. Just a short introduction to ROADMAP and the living labs and what are the special conditions that we have there, the real ROADMAP experience, the creation of a common view. I'll tell you a bit more about this in a minute. Also the focus areas and the methods of the different living labs, and as well as the different aspects to take into account and conclusions. So, first of all, I'll have to close the screen now. The resistance to antimicrobials, AMR, is acknowledged as an important threat, as Nicolás said, and besides, this is an issue that can include different actors and interests. The excessive use of antimicrobials leads to these problems. It is estimated that 2/3 of the future growth of AMR will be due to animal production, so we'll need to take into account human health here. The main goal of ROADMAP is to promote this transition towards reasonable use of antibiotics or antimicrobials in order to prevent this resistance. How can we do that? We are going to do that by improving the decision-making systems. ROADMAP will focus on the support to health and animal welfare, as we've been doing for some times. There are several approaches. When my colleagues from Pillar 2, as Nicolás said, they are carrying out these living labs. So if you study the literature to see how you can create these groups, to have a real co-creation of the different policies and impacts, you find that there are already some participative processes to improve, like field labs, platforms to carry out different trials, civil schools, groups to farmers' action groups, groups to exchange experiences, etc. But what is the difference? How do they differentiate themselves in ROADMAP in this project, which integrates all stakeholders in this kind of events to try to have conversations in which we can together create new systems for change? So what are the differences between these living labs? These are multi-stakeholder approaches, like creation long-term approach. Also, the idea is to share the ideas and solutions to plan the action to be carried out. Also, the action is implemented, that is, a test is done, then the results are debated and assessed, and then there is a common ownership based on the needs and desires of participants. And participants at all times are these stakeholders that can represent organizations or larger groups. By including all these stakeholders, a balance is reached and a certain level of representativeness of the different stakeholders. A lab puts these tools and strategies to test. In this case, we are talking about social and communication and sociology tools and strategies. As Nicolás said, our approach is multidisciplinary. The idea is to integrate the different sciences in order to work together in these living labs to obtain results. This is a participative process. On this slide, well, it hasn't been translated, but as you can see, how we can co-create, co-explore, experiment, create, and then you put all these techniques and strategies to test to see if they work. What is special about these living labs? Why are they so important in order to work for our reasonable use of antibiotics? Stakeholders and actors, that is, livestock breeders or people working closely with exploitations, veterinarians, and the agricultural industries, are the core of these changes. They meet in these living labs to debate about the ways of articulating this systematic change, focusing on a specific context that is a common identified problem for each of the living labs. As we will see afterwards, each living lab is different. Each has been formed depending on the actors and the context that they are part of. We will see that in the case of the different living labs that we have. There are multiple versions of these living labs for this for the best combination of the stakeholders. Stakeholders are the ones that decide what they want to focus on, what's the problem that they want to make progress in this context. All participants define this common approach in the lab, they validate them, and then they conclude with certain results. As we said, they can have different interests and of course, these can enrich the living lab, even if sometimes there can be debates, which is also interesting, so that the systematic change is not just a theoretical one, but rather with this multidisciplinary approach of the living labs, we can tackle these proposals in a real way. So it's not only about innovating, but also about breaking routines, attitudes, previous alliances, and the important thing is the process, because there's a lot at stake for many of the stakeholders. This is one of the games that we do in the living labs in order to have a common view of a shared problem. Each one of the stakeholders starts writing in each of the leaves what the starting point the starting problem that they want to speak about, and then they choose which ones stay, which ones are going to be removed, and what topics they are going to talk about in each living lab. This is the current state of living labs in ROADMAP. There are countries, or rather living labs. I'll tell you the difference between the different living labs, because sometimes it's a bit different to understand. We have living labs in different countries. Some focus mainly on the pork industry. Not only the industry, there's also veterinarians, breeders, etc. Also, cows or beef. In France, we also have one living lab focusing on poultry, pork. Well, I've grouped them so that you see how the different living labs are being grouped. And these are the ones that are already working. Now the assessment of the result is starting, and also the dissemination and debate about these results. We usually do that from the middle of the project onwards, because that's when we already have some context. We'll start telling you about specific results derived from these living labs. Nicolás showed a table before about the business stats. They are different. The difference with the living labs is the amount of field work. These are not labs or debate groups where people meet to debate, but rather we are talking about working groups where they experiment with some of the practices coming out of the results, and also the results after interviews that we are carrying out are being conveyed. Also, Nicolas talked about the quantitative surveys and qualitative surveys that we are doing with veterinarians and livestock breeders. We want to do this in Spain very soon, and then we will show the results in our communication channels and social media. The case studies are the ones that we are working on in the project, and then we have the living labs. At the level of the living labs, these systemic change proposals for the focusing on the different animals are proposed, and also focusing on the different projects that the members of the living lab have observed and decided to work upon. So, as I was saying, these are labs. Action and efforts are the most important things in this context for the stakeholders. Mainly, we are carrying out online meetings which improve accessibility and efficiency. As you all know, this is due to the current COVID situation. But once these groups have been created, the truth is we see that they are much more efficient than face-to-face meetings. We can develop a common view, as we said, with the flowers that we saw, a tree with all the problems, or the decision-making tree. We can use different techniques in order to put the different views of the participants on the table. All stakeholders commit, and we create different working groups to focus on the different areas of interest. This action and push must continue between meetings. There's a lot of work between meetings, meeting and meeting. The facilitators, the living labs have facilitators that help to carry out this work, and there's an individual or group follow-up depending on the topic. Some examples of activities that we have in the labs, or examples of different approaches. Some focus more on farms and exploitations in terms of assessment and vet support. In terms of guidelines, assessment of animal welfare, new health parameters, also training of or exchange of experiences with migrant workers, groups of young veterinarians, also policies on the use of antibiotics that we have at different levels. Also, this possibility, explore the possibilities of having better options for young beef, and also an examination of the legislation, which I think that will be the main focus of the round table. Then, the role of the living labs. For the competitive and powerful industries, which already have some strategies, that this can be challenging. Who is in charge of facilitating this? In this case, all living labs have a facilitator who helps identify problems that may come up due to conflicts of interest within the living lab. They can help to create these dynamics so that we can debate, discuss, co-create with the aim of creating systems. Also, this dilemma, how to tackle the sectors so that competitors who do not want to be sitting in the same room do not face these problems, how to tackle the structural problems, and also how to work on a proposed solution. The level of attention reaches the European Union. But, well, it's true that within ROADMAP we have European countries, but also there's Mozambique and Vietnam as case studies. We are collecting information about the regulation and practices in these two countries. As for what I just said, Living Labs offer a specific way of working among the different stakeholders to solve a problem and to find new solutions. They are based on dialogue and doing things, not just talking, but experimenting. There's also they focus on the learning curve to reach the objectives. Of course, they acknowledge the importance of diversity and of the context. There are different interests, as we said, and there are different starting points to change this situation in terms of the abuse of this kind of drugs, and also rethinking the practices, alliances, and needs. We also learned from Living Labs, from others, that in the context of European livestock breeding, I think that we are ahead of time. We can have more time for the roundtable, but I wanted to say that on the ROADMAP website, there is a section where you can find all the results of the project in Spanish. We are translating them so that you can get first-hand information. The project is being translated, and there are also 5 practice abstracts. These are short reports which we have to carry out in this kind of projects. These are recommendations and practices that we can implement and propose to different stakeholders that can be veterinarians or breeders in the different areas that we work on. Well, that's everything I wanted to say. You can find my contact information here. At a regional level, we are the country leaders of this project, so if you have any doubt, proposal, or need of clarification, there's no living lab in Spain, but we are going to work on these multi-stakeholder fora. We think that it would be interesting to put into practice what other living labs are doing elsewhere. As I said, we will launch the surveys with farmers and veterinarians and technicians, in short, to know what they think about the way of tackling this impact. Well, I think that's it. Ida says that there's also the possibility of sending questions through the question and answer facility in the platform. Yes, that's it. We have the questions and answers facility, and also we will have Klaxoon at your disposal, at the disposal of participants and speakers. When we finish the roundtable, there will be a forum where we will use Klaxoon, both speakers and participants. That's the QR code to enter Klaxoon. You can do it with your mobile phones and also through the link that you can see on screen. I would also like to remind you that after this session there will be a forum. The videos from all the interventions that are happening during the Galicia intervention days, this will be all available afterwards, so that if you want to check anything, you can have all this information at your disposal. Now we are going to move on to the round table, as Tamara said, on the state of the use of antibiotics in Spain. We were going to have a pharmaceutical company today. That hasn't been the case in the end, but we hope that the landscape picture that we make will be quite complete. So we'll read the experts. Please activate your cameras and microphones for this round table. First, we will greet the speaker, Luís Núñez Desiré from the Galician Veterinarian Council. Good afternoon, everyone. Gerardo Rivera Cuesta, the head of service of food security at the Xunta de Galicia. Good afternoon. I'm Cristiana Teixeira Justo from the National Plan of Antibiotic Resistance. Thank you for being here. So the first intervention will be by Luís Núñez Desiré. You have the floor. Good afternoon. Me llamo Luís Núñez y soy el presidente actual del Consejo de Veterinarios de Galicia. Mr. Desiré, I would like to remind you that you can speak in Spanish. There is simultaneous translation for those who want to speak in Spanish. In Spanish, just for your information. Well, I just wanted to make an introduction in English. That's why I was speaking in English. Well, as I was saying, my name is Luís Núñez. I am currently the head or president of the Galician Council of Veterinarians. This is a public corporation including 3,000 veterinarians from our region in the different places where we find veterinarian workings in livestock breeding, animal health, food security, etc. in all these areas. So the idea of the presentation, which will be short, is to put on the table the problems that I currently see at user level, that is, the problems that veterinarians can find in relation with the use of antibiotics and the resistance to them. I've called my presentation Resistant to Antibiotics a Silent Pandemic. I think that the resistance to antibiotics was something that we were unaware of, but it has caused many deaths. If I can move to the next slide, please, just quickly. What I want to say with this slide is that the life expectancy of humans has doubled in the last 100 years, mainly due to three reasons: vaccines, the generalization of clean drinking water, and antibiotics. Vaccines, since the Jenner vaccines. Well, my apologies for the layout of my presentation. Then Louis Pasteur had proposed some of the vaccines for the flu and smallpox, and these vaccines saved many lives. Then, of course, drinking water, clean drinking water. The first time that we had the first canalization of drinking water was of clean drinking water was done 200 years ago in Glasgow, and the first use of chlorine as disinfectant was in New Jersey 100 years ago. Now we move to antibiotics, which we can consider that 1928 is the starting point when Mr. Fleming discovers penicillin by chance. These are general ideas which we are all aware of, but it's good to make a small summary. Antibiotics are drugs used to fight diseases caused by bacteria. When we apply an antibiotic to fight the bacteria that generate a disease, these antibiotics can also destroy beneficial bacteria present in our bodies, which are essential for the good functioning of our bodies. From the point of view of veterinarians, we think that veterinarians are the only professionals authorized to prescribe drugs for animals, both pets and production animals. Antibiotics must also always be used with a recipe, with a prescription. Some drugs do not require a previous prescription, but all antibiotics do. require this prescription, which must be used depending on the race, disease, weight. It's essential to respect the waiting time given by the veterinarian in the prescription. I'm sure that Gerardo will also talk about this. All treatments will be included in the registry, both the veterinarian and the breeder registries. Next slide. Mr. Núñez, would you like us to use the PDF? Well, I've seen it was the problem was just in the first slide. Now it seems to be working well. Antibiotics are only useful in infections caused by bacteria. That is something that the general population should be aware of. Livestock breeders are aware of this, but maybe Dr. Google or self-medication can create many more problems than the original problems when people self-medicate. Also, veterinarians, after analyzing the different cases, will choose the most specific antibiotic. But also, one important thing here, it's not only about the active principle, but also the excipient is important. Preventing dirty facilities, having clean animals, the right feeding, and preventing stress in animals. These are much more effective measures than the use of antibiotics. Could we move to the next slide, please? Here you can see, well, maybe it's better to use the PDF. Yes, we are going to show the presentation in PDF so that everything can be done, can be seen right. Just a few seconds, please, and we'll share the PDF in a few seconds.
What I'm going to present in these next slides are the 7 weaknesses that I have collected that I think affect the current system of control of use of medicines. I don't want to point fingers at anybody because I think all sectors are involved, from the state administration to public administration to the vets themselves. This is a summary of all I've been saying. As I was saying, I don't want to point fingers at anybody because I believe that the vet in his free practice and also the farmer and public administrations or general state or regional administrations and even the associations, we're also responsible. We're also accountable. I wanted to mention that the electronic recipe programs guarantee that animals are under veterinary control. We believe that there are some IT applications that what they do is kind of whitening, like making okay the vet prescription. It's like the reverse prescription, which I think does not fulfill the basic principles of a correct prescription, because medicines, drugs should only be given to animals that are under the supervision of a vet. This recipe system is used to make this okay. It's called reverse recipe because the farmer decides from his experience what drug he needs. He goes to the sales, the pharmacist, and once they ask for this drug, the recipe is prepared for him, I think that the reverse recipe is perfect. It should be the other way round. It should be the veterinary who looks at the animals. He should prescribe the drug, and with this, he should go to the chemist to get the drug. We have tools to fight this. From Consello Galego, we have written a request to the councillor of the rural medium. However, we have not received any answers from them. I'm going to say this with all the consequences. This is recorded, but I'm going to say it. We don't understand how an organization that represents 3,000 veterinaries is not received, and why this type of electronic prescription is allowed. We wanted to talk a month ago about this need of putting at the disposal of all Galician farmers of an application, and we wanted to talk about this prescription too. They didn't want to answer. We wanted to talk about the safety in the farms. It's not got to do with this topic, but there's been some work accidents in the campaigns of sanitizing in farms. There's many cattle farms in reality. There's some farms in which veterinaries use antibiotics, but these farms don't have REGA, which is regulated by a royal decree, and all animals should be linked to a farm. This royal decree establishes in the first appendix as one of the requisites to do the monthly antibiotic declaration. They need the code of identification of the farm. This is done through an application. If you do not fill every section, you will not be able to make this declaration of antibiotics. This is what happens in Galicia. I suppose this is the same everywhere. There's many farms, sometimes small farms that appear and disappear, a bit like the river Guadiana that appears and disappears. Sometimes they buy a pig and they don't have just for 1 year, or they go to vets. They are asked for the prescription, but when they have to do the declaration, they can't do it because they don't have a REGA code. The third point is the sale of antibiotics which are not controlled officially. This is something that happens in reality. Who is doing this? I'm not going to say who does it because I don't know it. If I knew it, I would inform you about it. But this is something that does happen, that does appear in inspections. Some drugs have reached some farms or veterinaries without the forms, the documents that justify the existence of these drugs. The fourth item that I think should be improved is the possibility of prescribing antibiotics for pets by means of a numbered prescription, which is and doesn't allow them to be traced. In the article 8.4 of a royal decree, when it mentions the prescription for pets, we're talking about a normal prescription. We're not talking about something exceptional. It only requests the data of the veterinary name and surname, address, province where they are associated, the sign of the veterinary, but they don't ask for a number. This number is requested for farm animals and for exceptional prescriptions. I think this has been a mistake. All prescriptions should be numbered. It is true. For now, we don't have to do declarations for pets, but everything, it seems that in the future is going to be compulsory. Another weakness I've seen, and this is also seen in the 109 Royal Decree, what it shows in 89.g article is that a chemist could be in charge of 6 drug dispensing centers. Well, it says that depending on the possibilities and the volume and so on, but they don't specify the amount. If you should have a chemist by each pharmacy, we can't understand that a chemist can supervise a veterinary drug seller. I mean, a drug seller can sell a lot more than many chemists, but we believe that this doesn't allow the control to be appropriate. Something else that we don't consider correct is the possibility of changing the drug prescribed by the vet, having the chemist changing the drug that has been prescribed. The doctors prescribe by active principle. We have to prescribe with a the brand name, but when we give the drug, we take into account many things, the history of this farm, how it has responded to the use of other antibiotics, the type of excipient, and so on. So we should create a system that allows us to control this better. And last, this affects us all. In Galicia, we have Decree 63/2012, and in Article 5 of this decree, we consider the possibility of creating a health veterinary card, and this identification card was going to be developed by an order, but 9 years later, we still don't have any health card in Galicia. It could be the same, similar to the human, well, the health card for people. Maybe this shouldn't be done for all farms and all farmers, but there are some farmers who are quite significant. They are controlled. There's some, well, poultry, pork, and rabbit exploitations. There are big sheep farms. We should have a census so that this health card is compulsory, so that we could control the drugs perfectly, the drugs that are used, as there's been a decree for the small producers of waste. I mean, I'm talking about the containers or the sharp objects that only establishes 2 groups, the great producer of waste and the small producer of waste. The small producer is the one that produces less than 10 tons every year. I believe that this health card should be developed in the region. This is all I wanted to say. Thank you very much, Mr. Núñez Desiré. Now, to explain the perspective of control agencies and to add anything he considers appropriate, Gerardo, Rivera, Cuesta, you have the floor. Good afternoon. After Luis's speech, I'm going to talk about my topic. I'm going to share the screen. I think I have already shared it. I'm going to set a context so that in order to start a debate, I work in the service of food security of cattle productions. All the competencies are in primary production. There's a second sector that does not affect our work, and this is all within the National Plan of Official Control of the Food Chain. Now we are in the period between 21 and 25. What do? We execute official control programs. We have to, well, our work here consists of being an authority, a health police, and what we need is clear laws and stable laws. And the goals that are set should be specified in the laws. I'm going to give a very nice example. When you have a look at the selection criteria for the Frisona cow, the Spanish Frisona cow, what do you find? You have the ideal cow described with the different weights of the cow. That's what the legislation should be like. It should take us where we want to go, because all we can do is apply the law in the terms it is expressed. What do we do in these official control programs? We focus on distributors of veterinary food. The human food is also the competency of pharmacies, and that's where the official control is carried out. And there we have the control of both veterinary and human drugs. We control the distributors that devote themselves exclusively to animal medicines. These farming associations, these vets, we analyze their prescriptions. We analyze also the drug storage, something that's really, a vet uses these drugs. This is something that everybody should know. I mean, veterinarians can't do anything. You can have drugs, you can prescribe them, and you can administer them, but you have to follow the conditions of the regulations. I'm going to talk about the PresVet tool, which is a tool for the control of prescriptions, and this was started to monitor the consumption. In the official control, this PresVet tool is crucial. Going to a farm and knowing what has been prescribed and finding the prescription and so on, and the treatment, and being able to verify firsthand, independently of regardless of the documents they have. In PresVet, we can access this information about all the prescriptions, and I would like to ask for the royal decree to be modified, for it to be compulsory to report the antimicrobials that are prescribed in pets. Hygiene is a program which I think is very interesting. This is the generic guides of best practices for each type of production, and here you have analysis of all the risks you could have in a specific type of animal. We verify that the farmers control these risks. About what do we look at with the medicines? We look at the prescriptions, we look at the drugs that are present, and the management of waste of the drug and of the containers, which is also a problematic source of resistance to antimicrobial. I was very pleased to see that the regulation of 2019-6 is implemented. Administrations are working on a royal decree on drugs, but the law of 2019 is already in place, And for the first time, it talks about the registry of treatments in farms. That was a weakness we had in Spain. When we ask where is the legal request to have this registration of treatment, we went to the different laws, and finally we went to the royal decree that was established by Benir. And in that royal decree, it said that the veterinary would note down in a register these drugs that had been prescribed, and that would be in the hands of the producer, and there we would have the exact amounts that had been administered. These are small things, but I think for me these are giant steps, because administrations need legal security. We need the norms that are clear, but if we have to sanction, we need to have absolute certainty in the legal basis. And the official control program of raw milk, what do we do? First of all, we monitor the self-controls. There is a lot of self-control in the production of milk. The norm 853 of the European laws make it compulsory to carry out controls, but in Galicia there is enormous control on the production of milk. I would almost assure that all the collection of milk are controlled, all the inhibitors are controlled, and they pay for it. We monitor this very, very well. And we have a follow-up of all the positives to inhibitors. We also have another program for the official control of animal feeding. Where is this implemented? This is implemented to manufacturers, industrial manufacturers, transporters, warehouses, and so on. We have medicine drug. We have fodder with medicines. The fodder with medicines, medicated feed, that is controlled by a Spanish royal decree. The management, the prescription, and the administration of medicated fodder is similar to the administration of a drug. And finally, we participate in the execution of the National Plan for the Research on Waste. Here we shouldn't have medication. On occasions, we could find allowed substances, but substances that have not been used according to the authorized conditions. This is something we have to make people aware of, because drugs have some conditions for use, and they can be used in those conditions, not in other conditions. Because if they are used differently, we could be talking about illegal treatment, unless you have an exceptional prescription, which is perfectly defined under the responsibility of the veterinary, and the veterinary has to follow some really clear steps to determine the waiting time, for example. This is more or less the context. This is what I do, and now at the disposal of any questions you have. Thank you very much, Mr. Rivera Cuesta. We will have question time at the end. First, we will finish the initial interventions. Now it is the turn of Cristina Teixeira, who will deepen in the national control. Thank you, everybody, and thank you for the invitation to this roundtable. We join these initiatives with great satisfaction. Any initiative that helps the dissemination of the prudent use of antibiotics. I've also brought a presentation, a few slides. I wanted to show more or less what is the situation, what the situation is in Spain concerning the use of antibiotics. I'm going to talk a bit about the history. I'm going to tell you about the present data of antibiotic use and also about the future, which also has to do with the laws. In 2014, this was the situation. Spain was far above the European average in the consumption of antibiotics, both in human health and in animal health. In veterinary, we have been the #1 users of antibiotics in Europe. This snapshot doesn't leave us in a very good place, but at the same time, Europe was preparing a series of restrictions. One of them was the restriction of the use of colistina, which is an antibiotic which can be dangerous for human health, and they put a threshold of maximum 5 milligrams PCU, which should be reached in a period of 3 years by all member states. There was also a new legislation for restriction where they restricted prophylaxis and metaphylaxis, and they also limited the use of certain veterinary antibiotics, creating a new category of antibiotics. In this context, in 2014, in PRAN, which is the national plan against the resistance to antibiotics, we've had 3 editions. First one was the year 14 to 18. The second one was from 2019 to 2021, and then we're preparing the one from 2022 to 2024. What is PRAN? PRAN, besides a very small group of people who work full-time, it is also a much larger group of people who collaborate part-time with PRAN. We have 10 ministries involved in this project, all the Spanish regions, 7 entities that include scientific societies, universities, societies, professionals, associations, and so on, and more than 300 experts of the different areas. How do we work? PRAN works in the framework of One Health. We work on both human health and animal health, and also on the environment. We have 6 strategic lines of work. First of all, the surveillance of the consumption of antibiotics and of resistances, control, prevention, communication, training, and research. One of the first initiatives of PRAN, one of the first challenges, was the creating of the REDUCE programs. These are voluntary agreements. The animal production sector, together with PRAN and also with veterinary associations and farmers associations, we define a series of goals for each production sector that goes from working on the reduction of a group of antibiotics, or in particular on specific antibiotics, depending on the needs of each sector. We have several programs working in these sectors of production: pork, rabbits, poultry, lamb, beef, and so on. We are working with also with horse meat, with small animals, with egg-laying birds and other sectors. All these programs have been a great success because we have managed to reduce the use of cholesterol below 5 milligrams PCU. We have achieved this in the 3 years that the European Union had given us, and this is one of our greatest success stories. And we have also contributed to the reduction of veterinary antibiotics in Spain. The last data we have are these from the year 2014 to 2020. We have reduced it at 58.7% and 33% in retailers. These are the good news, but there's a lot of work ahead, obviously. In the last year, between 2019 and 2020, there's been a slight increase in the sales in pharmaceutical laboratories, and this has been there's been a greater increase in the retailers because we have had many more reports, more reporting, that maybe the data from 2020 are more accurate than the ones from 2019 because there's been an increase in the reporting. But there's been an increase in the consumption of some antibiotics, large-spectrum penicillin, lincosamidas, and other antibiotics.
There's also been an increase in premix and oral solutions. If we analyze depending on the species, pork is the one that consumes the most in Spain, also in 2016. Poultry and rabbits have descended quite a lot compared to 2016, and the bovine sector is the one that consumes the most antibiotics. We are aware that these data need to be analyzed cautiously. These are sales forecasts for, well, skid prescriptions are not included, so data could be altered here. We analyze these data with a lot of caution, but if we look at the last 2 years, it is true that pork, bovine, poultry have had a slight increase. Even if European data are still provisional and they need to be confirmed, we've also seen a global increase between 2019 and 2020 of the consumption of antibiotics. This is something to be analyzed with more detail, but I think it's been quite an atypical year, last year, 2020. Given two situations, Brexit on the one hand and the COVID-19 pandemic, which has probably affected the veterinarian sector. Challenges for the future. The biggest one, we all know it, the new legislation, the regulation 2019/6 and 2019/4, which will start being applied next year. This affects many data about the legislation of veterinary drugs, from the description to many aspects. But in terms of antimicrobials, it promotes responsible use and it imposes a couple of restrictions. The first one, the regulation talks about antimicrobials. This means antivirals, antifungic, and antibacterial drugs. Secondly, it also limits the prophylactic use to exceptional administration at an individual level. and for a restricted amount for the remaining antimicrobial. So the preventive use, for instance, a prophylactic administration of drugs through the feed or drying systems, that will be prohibited from January onwards. Metaphylaxis can be administered on those cases where there is a high risk of infection or where there is no other alternative. Also, the regulation tries to limit the use of certain antimicrobials with a list of antimicrobials that can only be applied in humans or only under certain circumstances, according to a category of antimicrobials with 4 categories from non-using to a prudent use. So certain treatments from January 2022 onwards will have to be justified. This required an additional effort on our side to improve health treatments, biosecurity, hygiene, prevention, control, and especially prevention of disease, to focus on the prevention of disease rather than on treating diseases. In order to do that, well, the justification of certain treatments, prophylactic, metaphylactic treatments for certain types of antibiotics can be done through a panel of susceptibility that justifies that. But the regulation opens the possibility, if such a panel is not possible or if we cannot wait to the results of the microbiology results for a treatment, then we can make use of the epidemiological information that justifies the treatment. That's why this plan has been implemented, and we've been working on useful tools for the prescription of antibiotics. We presented one yesterday, a map with added information on clinical pathogens, species, pathologies, and geographical location to help vets make decisions depending on the epidemiological information, and a second one which will be launched next November. This is a theoretical guideline based on the categorization of antibiotics and patterns of resistance. Here you can see what we are doing in terms of the consumption of antibiotics. If you need further information, you can visit the PRAN website. We are, of course, at your disposal if you have any question. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Ms. Teixeira Hussein. We are going to move to the Q&A session. After 5, we'll look at other questions that we find in collections. But now, if you want, you can activate your cameras, Mr. Rivera and Mr. Núñez Desiré. The first question that I would like to make, any of you can answer, but in this case, maybe we can follow the order of intervention. Mr. Núñez, Mr. Rivera, Mr. Teixeira, but well, you can stop me at any time. Do you think that a private regulation like the one that we have in other countries for the free labeling of antibiotics, do you think that should be regulated somehow? Mr. Núñez, I think that you are muted. Well, all the information that can be provided to consumers through labeling, as Gerardo said, must be regulated. I also work in the administration, And what we want is a safe legal framework. In order to act, you need to have a regulation to support your work. Otherwise, we could go into a field of arbitrariness. So, Mr. Rivera, do you agree that they should be regulated? Yes. I think it's great that these kind of initiatives are adopted, which also exist in Spain. The only thing that is a bit of concern for me is that if, for instance, if you put an antibiotic-free chicken in the market, maybe they could think that other poultry products have antibiotics, but that wouldn't be true. The conditions that they are bred will differ. So maybe if the animal welfare mechanisms fail and they get sick, they will be treated, but they will treat according to the law. The only problem I see is, well, the legends, the allegations of these labels, in order to avoid the false belief that other food products have antibiotics. What do you think, Mr. Sheda? What would be the best way in order not to confuse consumers? Well, given my experience in Pran, resistance to antibiotics is quite a delicate issue. I fully agree with Gerardo. Our position is that communication is one of the strategic lines of the Pran, and it's an extremely difficult task. Confusing consumers with labels, as Gerardo said, since all the products that we sell in our supermarkets are antibiotic-free, that can be misleading and dangerous. How should this be regulated? Well, that's a difficult question to answer. I don't know. Maybe through national legislation. At a European level, there's this gap. I don't know if Gerardo has a better answer. I insist on what I just said. We should regulate the specific statements in order to prevent any kind of confusion. In my case, for instance, animal feed, that is something which is regulated. A feed cannot say that it's improving this or that, because that would be a drug instead of a feed. So these kind of statements can be dangerous and misleading. So are then labels misleading? How can we differentiate, or how can consumers differentiate? Yes, labels do not lie, but we need to be careful. We see this constantly in two fields. In terms of animal feeding, when you grab animal feed, what you see there, it's awful. Also in the case of drugs, this is very well defined by the new regulation 2019/6. It defines that drugs is any substance that is presented with actions. So if you said holy water that cures a cold, well, according to the new regulation, that would be a drug. Allegations or statements. I'm in favor of information. I read these kind of labels constantly, but these statements or allegations should be done orderly, because that could be misleading for consumers. It's been hard to get to the point where we are in terms of meat and eggs, etc. consumers perceiving something else, yeah, that could be difficult or dangerous for the sector as a whole. Is there any app that you can use to better interpret labels when buying these products? Is there any kind of guideline? What do consumers need to pay attention to? Cristina, Gerardo, well, I don't know. Well, labeling is regulated at European level, so my opinion is maybe the only thing that consumers can do is, well, get some more information, but, well, that's not in our hands. I think that there are basic points that, in general, the consumer should be aware of. For instance, all food in the label need to include the health registry numbers. This is something that everyone should know. Meat has code number 10, fish is 12, eggs 14, milk 15. Each one has its own code, but they are determined with a seal, and in that number, in that register number, which is public, and you can also see the province where that food was produced. With that, we could prevent, for instance, if you read this is meat from Jabugo, this is ham from Jabugo, from a specific region, or this is milk from Galicia. In order for that milk to come from Galicia, it should have code number 15 at first, then the public registry, and then C from Coruña, O from Morense, PO from Pontevedra, or LU from Lugo. And that's easy to do. And that must be also visible. You could see what the origin is. In my case, when I go to the supermarket many times, I found two bricks of milk from the same brand with two different register numbers, and the same brand with two register numbers and the same registry number in two brands. Yeah, what we usually call the white brand. For instance, Mercadona, we know that they have their own brand, Hacendado. Oh, there's also other kinds of canned food, which already have their private label. Just for instance, there's brand X and Hacendado. If we take a look at the label, we see that the health register number is the same. It's the same factory. Well, that is a different debate, private labels, etc. But again, training people so that they can interpret a label. In this case, we are talking about foods, the labeling of feed and food in general. That's specific, for instance, for veterinarian, pharmaceutical people working in the pharmaceutical sector, etc. But if you go to buy to a supermarket, it will be also important to train the general population. In Spain, we love legislating, but then we don't get so much about the enforcement of the laws. For instance, there are many specific rules for fish. When you go buy fish, you need to see where it comes from. It has been deep frozen, and if you go to a market, many times you don't find that. Well, going back to antibiotics, which is where we were framing the debate today, I don't know if Mr. Shadow's and Mr. Rivera can tell us a little bit about the control of the regulation following the line of Mr. Núñez, Desiré. How do we check that the regulation is being enforced? In this case, I was asking mainly Mr. Teixeira or Mr. Rivera, since they work in control agencies, and I'm sure that they can tell us if there is any kind of check. This will. The Spanish drug agency does not have the power to do the surveillance. It's not a regulating agency. Yes, that's right. But what we are talking about is about the control of the use of prescription. I understand that you are referring to that. Yes, well, I didn't understand what you said before. Yes, of course. That's what I said. That's the goal of the Penecoca. There is a control of the whole chains, from manufacturers up to livestock breeders using them. Drugs, wherever they are used, need to have its own documentation, from wholesalers to others, vets, etc. But there is no parallel way. That's the only way. That's what I said in terms of deposits. If a vet wants to have some drugs and then the police stops him, they need to have everything registered. We have plans to control. We extract samples. We see how many veterinarians there are, how many deposits, etc. How many livestock exploitations, how many dispensers. Then a program sample is made. We made a written commitment every year. Then we managed that sample. That sample we informed the Ministry of Agriculture, and the Ministry of Agriculture reports to the European Commission. We also have an audit system, a surveillance system within our very structure, and also an internal audit at the regional government level, and also an external audit. Then there are audits from the European Union for the country profiles. If our livestock exploitation can move freely around the European Union with no borders, it is because we show year after year, well, the ministry or the King of Spain show that the drug normative is being applied because we use these control measures. So livestock breeders are aware of these controls. Yes, of course they are. In the case of drugs, if they fail to do so, we have a program of control. So you take the items, and this is all included in the normative. Everything is verified. If there are failures to comply, if there are infractions, administering a drug without a prescription is linked with the conditionality. The conditionality, if any of the present is not familiar with this, this has some support provided to the livestock breeders. If there is a support program to improve the facilities for cattle, well, of course, that all depends on the enforcement. That's what we call program control. Of course, any report, any result in the lab can lead to targeted controls. Just to clarify, I was talking about the animal health, but there's also one focusing on public health. We follow the whole food chain. Once the animal has been slaughtered, samples are taken before they are sent to the market for consumption. Also, the periodicity of sampling is made to prevent the use of unauthorized substances and to control the presence of authorized drugs where the waiting time, the metabolization time of the drug has not been respected. I would like to ask Ms. Teixeira, because in her intervention she mentioned the project which looked quite interesting about measuring the resistance to antibiotics. Could you tell us a little bit more about that project? I think that you are referring to the technological mapping. Yeah, this was launched yesterday. This is quite an ambitious project developed at the national plan level. The three main goals is for it to become a tool to support the prescription of antibiotics for clinical veterinarians, taking into account epidemiological information. It's also a map where we want to find trends and to pay attention to the resistance of clinical pathogens. And also the third pillar would be to boost the use of these diagnostics of susceptibility. What we wanted to do is to create a network of clinical analysis labs, all of them following the same methodology. It's a quantitative methodology. We can quantify the resistance value, the minimum inhibitory concentration, and with that, we can better quantify. We can elaborate reports, graphs. We can compare the resistance to clinical veterinarian pathogens with resistance to those pathogens in humans. So, in general, we will close a cycle, in this case, the surveillance of sick animals. I would like to invite you to participate if you wish. You can access these projects, both clinical labs or clinical veterinarians can get some more information in our website. Are the results going to be public? No. Luis, do you think that this new tool could be useful? Do you have anything to do with the process of creation? Do you think this new tool can be useful? I think it is really useful, and also the drug agency, given the results that are published in terms of reduction of cholesterol, I think that they are spectacular. The results obtained in terms of efficacy of the investments, I think it's great. When we see the reduction that we've seen in such a short time, I think that we're working on the right line. But publishing the results, well, I always say that too much information is also a way of disinforming. It's a way of disinformation. We need to take account of the results. Maybe some results can be read on a biased way because that's what interests you. So doing it from the administration, we have more guarantees of transparency, all that, or working for the public good. private companies try to, to do things for their own benefit. So everything that relates to good process information for me is well received. I was going to ask Mr. Rivera, are there welfare actions that could be recommended to farmers so that they do not use this kind of antibiotics? First, we work with the plant agency, and we are always willing to be volunteers. Specifically with this student in Galicia, there is a lab in Lugo, which is adhered. Today there was a vet who said, well, we've been telling the plant that we already have some volunteers. So the tool in this case is going to be really important. It doesn't need to be public, but it will be somehow public because they will all have the information. I would like to clarify one thing. The data are not public because they are sensitive data, and as Luis said, they could be used in different ways and for good or bad purposes. We are aware of that, so that's why we have limited access to the tool. Only the labs that are part of the program can have access to the tool. Only enrolled vets will have access, and of course, individualized data are not going to be shown, or where a certain case of resistance comes from. We will always use aggregated data at the national level. Vets will have access to this their own data, but they have that already. But in the case of national data, we ensure that they will always be aggregated data.
Same thing for the labs. They have access to the individual data and the national aggregated data. Also, the regions will have access to their individual data and the national aggregated data. No company outside the project and nobody external to the project will be able to access without our authorization. So we guarantee that this person will use the data adequately. In order to become a member, you need to sign an adhesion agreement where one of the clauses is that the data should not be used outside the context of the project. I wanted to go back to a question I asked before. I don't know if Gerardo can reply to this. We need to read the labels, pay attention to some specific aspects. For somebody in the sector, are there any very specific well-being actions that you can already tell the farmers? If you do this, this, and this will help you avoid the excessive use of antibiotics. Yes, instead of raising my hand, I just nod and you give me the floor. Biosecurity and healthy conditions of the animals. Because when the data of consumption are presented, I'm not surprised that consumption has increased. If you look at pork, well, they've been consuming more antibiotics, yes, but also the demand of pork meat has increased. In any warehouse that might not have the right condition, anybody without training can start feeding pigs and they earn money. Well, they earn money in conditions that are not the best and in conditions that require him to use antibiotics. We are always insisting on the hygiene conditions and biosecurity in the farms. It's the only way of having healthy animals. When animals are healthy, they eat well, they're comfortable, they produce what they are asked for. They produce milk, they produce meat. That's the only way, the conditions of the farms, that's the only way to improve. I was reminding you that in Mr. Núñez Desiré's intervention, he mentioned some hygienic conditions that could avoid the use of antibiotics. Is there a lot of way to go to make sure that farms have these hygienic conditions? Farms, cattle farms, they're not all the same. Each one is different, even between different species. An intensive production of, for example, of pork has nothing to do with an extensive exploitation of beef, for example, what we call mountain cattle. What we want to say is that by being orderly, clean, and so on, you obtain great improvements in the results. We're talking maybe of just with a 5% investment, the population is increased 30, 40%. Okay, we get to a point where we need to introduce other systems. To say it like colloquially, when you start a diet, for example, just by removing the fried stuff and the soft drinks and so on, and walking a bit, you manage to reduce your weight. But then, if you want to get to the next step, losing more kilos, well, you need to make a greater effort. Obviously, the correct hygiene in the cattle farms is something that farmers are starting to realize. It's very important, but also, as I said in my presentation, very often only by this hygiene we manage to avoid the use of antibiotic. I think they are working on this. The farmers' associations and the administration are all working on this. As we're going to start moving on to the forum very soon, I would like to ask you what you have found more interested from the roadmap, and how do you think that the project can reach the impact it's looking for? What would be the way of promoting this roadmap? First of all, I wanted to answer the previous question, if you let me do so. I couldn't agree more with my colleagues, but I wanted to point out something. We have managed to reduce by 60% the use of antibiotics in the vet sector. It wasn't in a day, that wasn't something that happened magically. It was something that happened thanks to the work of many technicians, many vets, and many farmers, thanks to this change of mentality, of the awareness rising, of the prudent use of antibiotics, of working on biosecurity, on hygiene, on animal well-being, on nutrition, on whatever. I think that all vets in this country know the right way to work. We all know how to prevent infections. We know how to use antibiotics prudently. Maybe the farming sector needs a bit more effort in this sense, but some sectors are extremely professional, extremely conscious, and I have been monitoring their farms closely. They know exactly what their animals need in order to produce and in order to guarantee all the well-being conditions. So thanks to this, we have reduced the use of antibiotics by 60%, which is an excellent achievement. I think in the European Union, we are the country who has reduced the use of antibiotic the most. And that doesn't mean that we have achieved this because we are a country that has an enormous production. The data I've given you is in milligrams PCU, which means that it depends on the number of animals and the weight of these animals. We don't give the weights in tons. We are not giving the raw data. We are giving data that can be compared with other countries and between sectors. So the fact that we have more pork or more lamb has been corrected. There's been an increase in this last year. This increase has been corrected, taking into account the animals and the standard weight of these animals. In any case, I want to reiterate this reduction of consumption of antibiotics has been extremely successful, and this has been thanks to the professionalism of the sector of animal health. It is indeed an impressive figure. Mr. Teixeira, could you tell us what you find more interesting about the roadmap and how do you think we should promote it? Yes, I think that all initiatives for dissemination, for informing and clearing out questions and doubts about antibiotics, they are all welcome. I think mistake that veterinarians have is that we don't know how to promote ourselves. If anybody can help us with this, they're very welcome. Maybe by saying something on a positive note, and I would like to say something more related to the topic, the consumption of antibiotics. Well, dissemination, obviously social networks are the best for this. We all live in social networks. It's a part of our lives, especially young people. They are always on the web, and social networks are the place where we have to be. Mr. Rivera, could you give us your conclusions? You agree with Ms. Teixeira, everything has to do with dissemination. I think this forum is an excellent opportunity, and I want to thank you. Thank you for giving the administration the opportunity of speaking, because this is not very frequent, and I think that the administration is doing our task is very necessary. Spain has been the first producer of fodder in the European Union for the last 3 years. After each kilo of fodder, there is a correspondency in eggs, meat, and so on. We are great producers of food. I wanted to mention a weak link we still have. We still have farmers and vets who do not have a clear relationship between them. I would like to see that the relationship between vets and farmers was always clear and transparent, and they work for each other. If the vet if the way he asks, if he's afraid of losing his customer because of clinical activation, that's not the way to work. I wanted to ask you about the roadmap. Is there anything that you find as particularly interesting? I think it's very interesting the way you try to look for how in the lip labs, how you are trying to find the key points, the living labs, of course, yes. Mr. Núñez Desiré, would you like to answer Mr. Rivera? What question? What would you like to say me to say about Ricardo? Well, about the relationship between vets and customers. Well, if a vet is afraid of losing his customer, well, we're all aware of this. Very often, the empathy or the fear of losing a customer, the relationship between the farmer and the vet, sometimes it's something good, and sometimes it's harmful. even if it seems something we're apart, all the health professions need a civil security insurance, and very often a vet acknowledges a mistake that they have not made so that the farmer can receive a grant. That is something that's unimaginable in human medicine. A doctor saying that they have made a mistake in a surgery, they haven't used the right drug, and so on, in order to be able to receive a compensation. Well, this does happen among vets. Now, talking about the possibility of vets selling drugs, well, the first thing we have to take into account is that there has to be some independence. Sometimes vets have to break the rules, the professional rules, in order to satisfy their customers. Well, sometimes it's not pointing. I don't think we have to point fingers at anybody. We all have our own part of responsibility. Well, when you point at someone with your finger, the three fingers are pointing at you. So we're all responsible in part. This is a joint work between the administrations, the veterinarians, and the farmers. More specifically about the other thing you were asking me about ROADMAP, I agree with what my colleagues have said. More than a specific idea, what we like is that the importance in the reduction of antibiotics goes beyond our sector. I'm going to speak on behalf of Cristiana, Gerardo, and myself. We are well aware of this importance. We should be able to transfer this to society in general, and you allow us to disseminate this situation, showcase this. I was calling this the silent pandemics. It's very important. I think there's deaths of people in hospitals because they are resistant to antibiotics. We try to save some antibiotics and not use them in animals so that these are effective on human beings. Informing the general population about this, well, that's the most important thing. This global idea is something that affects us all and that we don't know when we're going to be needing it. Maybe this is going to affect a family member or some surgery that we think would be very simple. Well, I'm really happy that you find this ROADMAP project interesting. Now we're going to start with the stakeholders forum. So I would like to ask anybody who has not entered Clausun, please use the QR we have shared. You also have the link in the chat so that you can interact live. And also the speakers, they can also enter Clausun, which is really easy to use. In order to coordinate this forum, we have Maria Rey with us. She's the coordinator of the Quality Department of AGACA. I don't know what you think of this panel. Have you found it interesting? Good afternoon, everybody. Of course, I found this panel really, really interesting, particularly because the topic that we were speaking about is particularly important, and I think that the speakers were extremely interesting, and they are very, very knowledgeable. One of them is a personal friend of mine, so I have heard him speak in other fora. I have spoken with Gerardo about this topic on many occasions, so yes, obviously it was really, really interesting. And the project is obviously an extremely interesting project. I think now we will be seeing you on the screen. We will wait for you to appear on screen in the next forum. We remind the users of Clausun that this application can be used to interact live, to ask questions. It's a tool that's extremely useful. We have used this tool in Galicia Innovation Days on other occasions, and you can access it through the link we have put in the chat and also through the QR we have shown on the screen. If you have any questions related to the roadmap project, you can ask them now. So now we're going to start this forum. Maria, we give you the floor. You're in charge now in order to answer any questions that have been left outstanding. Thank you very much. I don't know if you already see the questions on screen. We're waiting for production to tell us. Here they are. Yes, you can see them now. These questions, in principle, are addressed at all the profiles that might be present in this forum. So the first question is, which is the profile of the stakeholder, a scientist, a farmer, a vet, or somebody working in administration? So the first question is knowing who is behind this forum. Once this has been answered, we would like to know the supply chains that do not use antibiotics. How many people know the supply chains without antibiotics? All these questions are aimed at all the farmers, the cattle breeders. In which level do you think that economic barriers are more evident? You can answer production, distribution, marketing, or others. How do you think that this should be dealt with in the farms? Administration should create the figure of the vet responsible of the farm. The stock breeder should have a vet that assumes it, or the farmer should do this by themselves. Now we want to ask a question to the farmers. What incentives do you have for investing in the farms that would allow you to carry out these changes? Are there any incentives in place, or if there aren't any incentives, in order to carry out the reduction of the use of antibiotics? Now, some questions for the vets. Do you think vets are aware? Are they informed about what they need to do to carry out this plan? Do you use or do you know any tool to monitor the situation of animals that have been treated with antibiotics? Have you experienced situations in which antibiotics have not worked? Now, the next questions are for the scientific community. How important is this aspect in the moment when you decide to purchase? If they have the same price, you would choose it because you look at labels, you were willing to pay more if it was the case, or I'm not affected by these initiatives. How can we change the attitudes? How can we change human attitudes and habits? And finally, I suppose there's some people from some members of the administration. So we would like to ask them three questions. Who decides if the antibiotics that are used, if the use has been adequate or not? The farmer, the owner of the pet, the father, the carer, the vet, the consultant of the farm, doctor, vet, government, national competent authorities, scientific experts, supermarket consumers, international organizations? Do you think the consumers are aware of the plan for the reduction of antibiotics? Do you need a new regulation of the use of antibiotics? Thank you very much for answering these questions and participating in this forum. And I would like to remind you that we're going to leave these questions open so that throughout the week, if anybody wants to join the forum and answer these questions to have a wider vision of what all the stakeholders think, from vets to farmers to the political part, administration, and so on. So these questions will be open for you to answer at any time. Thank you very much to you all for your participation. So I understand we have finished this roundtable and this stakeholder forum. So I would like to thank everybody who has participated and attended to this roundtable. I think we have painted quite a wide picture of the ROADMAP project, and we've talked about the resistance to antibiotics. We have talked about many questions that are left to answer. Thank you to Cristiana Teixeira, Gerardo Rivera, and Luís Núñez for their contributions and for sharing their knowledge. The classroom will be open for anybody who wants to continue answering questions. They can do it. We'll have all the videos at your disposal if you couldn't see it now, you can see it anytime in the future. And thank you very much for this last intervention. Tomorrow we will continue at 9 o'clock in the morning, and you can continue booking B2B meetings. Thank you very much to you all.